So how does SEO work? Well, it's an interesting question because it is in fact, to a certain extent, a moving target. How Google decides to rank sites is constantly changing based on their various algorithms. And I've been doing this for a long time, and 10 years ago how we used to rank sites was very, very different how we do it today. So let's have a look at the basics. Well, you've got your website, all right? And what you're going to do in the first instance, and we're going to look at this in the very early lectures, is how to optimize it for certain keywords. Once you've done that and you've got the bare bones, the basics of your site, more or less where you are now, in fact, with your product reviews, etc., Google's going to come along and its robots are essentially going to index your site. They will acknowledge the existence of your site. But that's not going to do very much for you. Yeah? Google's going to know roughly what your site's about based on the keywords that you've used, but it's very, very unlikely it's going to show up in the listings. You might be searching for it on page 20, 25, 30, whatever, and it's still not showing. Now, the reason for that is that to get listed, you need to write good quality content. But having written great quality content, it's still not enough. Because the next thing you need to do is to get acknowledgement from other sites, approval if you like. And that's done by people linking to you. So here I've got website 1 linking to your site, okay? So website 1 will be a site about your area, okay? So for me, we're talking about fitness trackers, for example. So imagine there's another site, a blog, could be anything, that has seen what I've written on my site and think that looks like great content. I'm going to mention it on my site, on website 1, and I'm going to provide a link back. And for Google, that's a vote of confidence, particularly if that website 1 is a higher ranking site in the first place, okay? If we dream a little bit and imagine that, I don't know, CNN or something suddenly picked up some of my content and started pointing to my site, CNN being a globally extremely well-known site, that would give my site a massive boost. On the flip side, if my sister had just started a site yesterday and provided links, then that's really going to do very, very little because her site is completely unknown. Now, the more sites that you get, the better. Now, having said that, you're not looking for hundreds of backlinks, as they're called. You are looking for quality, not quantity. You just need a few, in fact, in order for Google to start thinking, yes, this is a really great site. I'm going to start pushing it up the rankings, and you'll begin to move towards the #1 spot over time. Now, as you know, SEO can take time. It can take 3 to 6 months for you to start seeing results, but the patience will absolutely pay off. So that's pretty much how it works these days. I know that's extremely basic, high-level view. But as we go through this course, or indeed as you go through your adventure on building out your site, wherever you might be, if you start thinking to yourself, how does this thing work? I've forgotten the basic principles. Come back to this, because this is essentially how SEO works in today's world. So let's just dive into a bit more detail so that you really understand the essential points. Now, I would say that 10% of the work that you need to do is related to what we call on-page SEO. Titles, meta descriptions, headers, alt tags. If you don't know what those things mean, don't worry. But this is kind of like the old school stuff in a way. This is the stuff that we used to focus 90% of our time on 10 years ago. But now it's really only 10%. I'll take you through these steps, so don't worry. 40% of it, as I'm sure you're starting to grasp, is all about writing that excellent content. And as I say, you don't need loads of it, right? There's a sort of a misconception with SEO that somehow you need to write blog posts every single week and that's going to get you up the rankings. It might, but what's far more important is quality over quantity. You could write one amazing blog post and it gets picked up by several high-ranking sites, and suddenly your site is going to shoot up the rankings just from one excellent one. All right, so you don't need loads, but it does need to be excellent. Now, the other 40% is all about promoting your content. In the previous slide, I was talking about those backlinks that you would get from other sites. Well, sadly, that's not just going to happen. It might, but for the most part, you're talking about being proactive. You're talking about approaching sites, site owners, and trying to develop some sort of relationship with them and get them to post their links, get them to talk about your articles, etc. on their site. All right. So again, you don't need loads. You just need a few very good quality sites pointing to your site. Now, the remaining sort of 10% is, I wouldn't say it's out of your control, but I've put there vaguely other factors. Okay, I put things like age of domain, the site load speed. There's be all kinds of other small factors that go into the whole Google algorithm to determine where you sit. Okay, but you can see there, I hope, what's really, really important. So in order to do this, we've got to focus on the niche, as we've been talking about since the very beginning of the course, and of course be super thorough. I really hope that point is well driven home by now. And the result of all this is that you're going to create a great user experience, and the user will stick around, which, by the way, is another Google ranking factor. If you think about it, the user comes to your site, they stick around on your site, they spend time on it. That's an indication to Google that the person has found what they're looking for. So all of your hard work is naturally going to result in a great user experience, and you'll get all kinds of great benefits as a result. Now, just a few footnotes. First thing is, stay focused on content, right? Ignore all the tricks and black hat techniques. Once you start getting into SEO and you go onto Google or you go onto YouTube, there are obviously thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of articles and what have you, all about SEO. And many of them are about these tricks or black hat techniques. This is ways of tricking Google into pushing your site up the rankings quickly. Now, it might work, but it'll only work for a short period of time. And you might have heard of the various Google updates, for example, wiping out various sites. And it's these sites that practice these kinds of underhand techniques, shall we say, in order to push themselves up the rankings, that get punished. They're the ones complaining when Google changes its algorithm. But if you stay focused on content and great quality, you are not going to have that problem. Now, the other thing is SEO traffic is warm traffic. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is, if somebody goes onto Google and types in Fitbit Ionic review, that means that they are already interested. Before they've even come to my site, that's what they're interested in, clearly. So by the time they get to my site, they're warm. We warmed them up a bit. This is not purely cold traffic. It's also free. I mean, we've got to spend a lot of effort to get to this point. And it has strong buyer intent. Again, using that example of Fitbit Ionic review, there's a good chance if somebody types that in that they are looking to buy, and they're certainly considering that they're somewhere in the sales funnel. And ultimately, of course, SEO lasts a long time. It can last years. You write a great article and you get some great links to that article. It could sit there for years and continue to drive free traffic to your site. Now, let's just cover this off now, because Facebook ads is obviously going to pop up at some point. And I'm not going to talk about Facebook ads in this course because I don't believe, especially in the beginning, that it's commercially viable. Facebook ads are expensive. We are dealing with a model where the margins are good, but they're not amazing, not like, let's say, drop shipping. So to go into Facebook ads at this stage is pretty much a surefire way of really losing money. And the other thing to bear in mind is that Facebook is an interruptive advertising technique. So in other words, what I mean is that somebody's on Facebook, they're looking at their pictures, they're looking at what their friends have done on the weekend, and suddenly we've got a Fitbit Ionic advert sitting there. We are interrupting their thought process. I'm trying to get them to come to my site. Now, if I get them to click on my ad, they're going to land on my site, but they're going to be cold. They're going to be completely cold to the whole process because literally 10 seconds ago, they weren't thinking about this at all. So they are not warm in that same way as I was explaining about SEO. They don't have that advantage that SEO brings. And lastly, don't be tempted to hire an agency. If you go to Upwork or Freelancer, you're going to find hundreds and thousands of so-called SEO experts. And I can pretty much guarantee that should you employ their services, especially in the beginning, it's going to have almost no effect on your site and you're going to waste your money. Perhaps longer term, in 6 months' time when you're making great money, you might want to go back and start thinking about it. But what I want you to do now is to take the time to learn the basics. Not only is that going to start ranking your site for you, but if you do go back and want to employ an agency or a freelancer, you're going to be able to assess them properly. You understand it well enough to know whether they are really giving you great advice or not. So there we go. That's a very high level view of SEO, but there are some really, really important points in there. Really think about those that are going to pay dividends massively in the long run.